Lawyers of Reddit, what was your hold it moment where you knew you would win? Not a lawyer but got robbed at gunpoint in my home. Long story short,
he would have gone to prison anyway, but the kicker is that the shoes he wore to court were the same
shoes he stole from my house. Judge asked if I wanted them back. I said yes. Judge made him take them off in court and walk back in socks. Donated the shoes. It was more about the principle. I had a client charged with battery. The alleged victim didn't really support the prosecution's case and in any event was reluctant to testify. They still had another witness though, and she said that my client was hitting the alleged victim, so it wasn't looking great. The prosecutor and I were talking before court started, hanging out by the courtroom doors. When the witness walked in, she looked right at my client, who was sitting not 5 feet from me, then scanned the room and said, "Where is client name?" The prosecutor and I looked at each other for a minute, and then he said he needed to check on something. When I saw him a few minutes later, he told me he was dismissing the case. I was testifying for the defense.
A young man had been arrested for assaulting a police officer,
allegedly throwing bottles during some unrest in Oakland following the verdict in the trial for the cop who shot Oscar Grant in the back on the BART platform. I had been there filming stuff, caught his arrest on video, and his brother found my footage on YouTube and asked me to testify. I had only seen bottles being thrown from this one corner of a parking lot, from behind me,
with the bottles flying over my shoulder.
The defendant was in a group in front of me. On the stand, the prosecutor seemed to think I knew the defendant and was there basically committing perjury on his behalf. I explained why I had been there that night, that I had never seen this guy before, hadn't been coached by the defense, and hadn't been paid other than a small amount for my travel and time.
Finally,
exasperated after much back and forth, the prosecutor says, "Well, if you don't know the defendant, then why are you here testifying for him?" I thought for a moment and said, "I guess I just wouldn't want an innocent man to get convicted for a crime he didn't commit." He got visibly flustered and quickly moved on, trying to insinuate that if I didn't know him,
how would I have known to be looking in his direction to see whether he was throwing things?
And I tried explaining that if you're looking at a group of random people, and one of them throws something, you will naturally fixate your attention on that person. But because nobody in that group threw anything, there was nothing to notice in the first place. It looked like the police just grabbed him at random. They arrested the defense attorney, bought me lunch down the street, and then he got a call from his colleague that the jury took all of 10 minutes to return a not guilty verdict on the assault charge. They said my response was legendary though, and that no attorney should ever ask a question they don't already know the answer to. This guy just seemed to have a narrative about a prior relationship to the defendant that he assumed was accurate, and was trying to call my credibility into question.
We had some huge issues with the landlord,
trying to enter without letting us know beforehand, not answering to fix issues, very aggressive when talking with us. When he decided to sell the place, he didn't check with us about the visits and just showed up randomly with potential buyers. We told him to get lost. He eventually left but called us the same evening to threaten us.
We sent emails to remind him of our rights as tenants and he answered by threatening us some more.
In an email, we eventually end up in small issues court. Not from the US. Don't know the name.
And he fabricates a story about how we are terrible tenants and we try to discourage buyers.
We just showed the judge the emails as well as the open complaint to the police we filled a few days earlier. The judge couldn't believe it and gave him a formal warning. Gave us 3 free months of rent. In the end, the guy just used a real estate company to sell the place. All went smoothly and we still live there with lovely landlords that aren't completely bonkers. My client was riding his motorcycle on a relatively calm street when this guy exited his garage without looking, and ran over him. In deposition, the guy brought a witness that was with him on the passenger seat the whole time. The witness maintained that my client was driving too fast and that there was no time to brake the car. I asked him the same question a few times in different ways, making him tell the story again. In the fourth telling, he, already a bit frustrated, let it slip. Look, I've already told you. We were exiting the garage and as soon as I lifted up from getting my cell phone on the car's carpet wait.
So you didn't even see the crash?
Quote, there was no coming back from that. When the petitioner's attorney called me my brother's name when I was on the stand. My brother is a shitbag and I don't associate with him anymore. But dude has a lengthy criminal history and it pops up on traffic stops occasionally. So I was in court over custody of my oldest and her mom's attorney was trying to paint me as a hypocrite for being an addict. I denied it all on the stand and he said, now James I must remind you that you are under oath and by denying this you are committing perjury.
I stared him dead in the face and said, my name is Bill.
James is my brother. Even the judge laughed at him and the only reason we didn't bring it up sooner, we knew he submitted it as evidence but had no idea why, was because I really wanted to know what he was up to with it all.
Parent termination case I was prosecuting.
Dad went on how he has changed his life around and worked the AA program. Asked him what step he was on, and he proudly proclaimed 3. Asked him what step 3 is. He had no idea. Then asked him step 2 was. Again.
No idea. Parental rights terminated.
When I practiced insurance defense, was handed a file to take over of a slip and fall. Guy tripped on a hose. Tore his ACL. The partner had taken the guy's depot already so I read the transcript. I'm a Michigan football fan. Watched every game for 20 years. This guy testified he was the starting safety for a certain rival for certain years.
Also that he graduated with a double major that doesn't exist at that school.
I immediately knew this was false. Partner didn't understand. Dug deeper.
Lied about so much stuff unrelated to the fall for no reason.
Eventually found high school records from football injuries of head trauma, knee injuries, and a slip and fall injury a few months after ours. He also testified he rehabbed an ACL surgery after 1 month. Motion for fraud on the court filed. Immediately settled. Not a lawyer. But I'm currently in a custody battle. Mother is saying I can't be trusted because I've been refusing to take our child to the therapist. The therapist testified I couldn't bring our child in because therapy must have both parents' consent. And mother has retracted consent. Very abbreviated, I was prosecuting a convenience store owner for luring a young girl who regularly came into the store back to a part of the store to grope, fondle and kiss her. Child enticement. It was the only section of the store without surveillance camera coverage. They were in the back room for about 2 minutes and 17 seconds. For the timestamp on the videos. Of the many arguments the defense put on.
One was there was no way there was enough time for anything to happen.
In my rebuttal on closing, I asked the jury to imagine what could happen in the room in that amount of time. And I asked them to all close their eyes while I timed out 2 minutes and 17 seconds on my watch. In silence. After about 60 seconds 2 of the jurors started crying. Knew it was going to be guilty right then. I worked on a case involving defective processes. In discovery, we got emails from the defendant's engineers that had worked on the processes. They were in an Asian country, but the emails were in English because they were going to US executives. One of the more senior engineers basically laid out the exact defect we were suing over, explaining what the problem was and why it was their fault, and finishing with, "This is big problem. We ship crap to customer." Quote, "Needless to say, we hit them over the head with that in mediation, and they settled shortly after. My mom hit a guy on a bike with her car in a parking lot. She claimed he hit her. She also wanted to countersue the cyclist for scaring her. In her deposition, she started every sentence with 'when I hit him.' Sued a former employer for $3,500 in unpaid wages. It was a slam dunk. Had a letter stating what my salary would be versus pay stubs that were less. So I didn't bother getting a lawyer to save on fees. Turns out the company thought they could try the same strategy. I show up to court and the manager of the local office is there with an affidavit from the CEO, saying he's allowed to represent the company in court. The judge asks him, "Are you an attorney?" "No, just an employee. A company can't have pro se representation." Judge immediately ruled in my favor. Felt fucking fantastic.
I represented an elderly Indian couple
who didn't speak English very well and owned a rental property. They had a tenant at the time who had not paid rent in over 6 months. They had tried to evict her on their own, but when they got to court, the tenant produced some handwritten notes which they had given her the year prior thanking her for payment.
But they failed to date the notes.
Of course, the tenant added recent dates herself. The tenant also produced a partial certified check receipt, but most of it was illegible. Anyway, because of their poor English, they had difficulty understand the questions and giving intelligent answers, so they lost the initial case. They hired me to help address all of the various lies that the tenant was putting forth. Anyway, we refiled. I had my clients pull the banking records, so we could show the date that the certified check was actually deposited into their account. The plan was simple. Let the tenant make the same arguments and then present the banking statements showing the deposit date. My clients also found a photocopy of one of their notes, but it was undated, unlike the copy the tenant presented the last time. Well, when the judge finally understood that the things the tenant had presented occurred the year before, his cheeks turned bright red and he asked the tenant, "What year did you make this payment?" The tenant started saying something like she couldn't be exactly sure when, and the judge cut her off again in a very loud voice. "What year?" Quote, "Needless to say, the clients got their eviction granted." Bonus content. When the tenant arrived at court, I watched as she got out of her car, walked to the back and pulled out a wheelchair and proceeded to stay in that wheelchair until the case was over. Once the judge left the courtroom, she folded up the wheelchair and carried it to her car, mumbling that she hates hashtagging lawyers. Anyway, that was a very satisfying day.